Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. Genesis Episode 35. Part 5, Literary Style, Enduring Lessons, and Modern Relevance. The Book of Genesis, the opening text of the Torah, introduces the origins of the world, humanity, and the Israelite people through a rich tapestry of stories. Its literary style, characterized by narrative structure, poetic language, and symbolism, not only shapes its storytelling but also amplifies the enduring lessons it imparts, lessons about faith, human nature, family, and divine promises. These teachings remain profoundly relevant today, offering wisdom for navigating modern challenges such as spiritual disconnection, ethical dilemmas, and societal issues. This explanation delves into each aspect: literary style, enduring lessons, and modern relevance, providing detailed insights and examples to illustrate Genesis' significance as both a self-contained narrative and a precursor to the Torah's redemptive and legal framework. 1. Literary style, the artistry of Genesis. Genesis' literary style is a masterful blend of narrative techniques, repetition, symbolism, and characterization, all of which contribute to its theological depth and enduring appeal. As a primarily story-driven text, it contrasts with the legal and ritual focus of later Torah books, using its artistry to convey profound messages. Narrative structure and organization. Genesis is structured as a series of interconnected stories, organized by the recurring phrase "these are the generations of Toledo." This formula introduces genealogies and family histories, providing a chronological flow from the creation of the world, Genesis 1-2, to the patriarchal narratives, Genesis 12:36, and the Joseph story, Genesis 37:50. The Toledo framework, seen in passages like Genesis 5:1, this is the book of the generations of Adam, and Genesis 25:19, these are the generations of Isaac, unifies the text by tracing the covenantal line from Adam to Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and finally to Joseph and his brothers, the ancestors of Israel's 12 tribes. This structure not only concludes Genesis' focus on origins but also bridges to the nation-building narrative of Exodus, where Jacob's family becomes a people. Repetition and parallelism. Repetition is a key feature, used for emphasis and thematic reinforcement. In the creation account, Genesis 1:1-2:3, the phrase "and God saw that it was good" recurs after each day's work, highlighting the order and goodness of creation. This rhythmic repetition, common in ancient Near Eastern literature, underscores God's sovereignty and intentionality. Parallelism is also prominent, as seen in the dual creation narratives. Genesis 1:1-2:3 offers a cosmic, ordered account, while Genesis 2:4-25 provides an intimate, human-focused perspective. These complementary accounts invite deeper reflection, a technique that prepares readers for the Torah's multifaceted legal and poetic sections. Symbolism, numbers, names, and objects. Symbolism enriches Genesis' narrative. The number 7, representing completeness, appears frequently: 7 days of creation, 7 pairs of clean animals on Noah's Ark, Genesis 7:2, and Jacob's 7 years of service for Rachel, Genesis 29 hours 20 minutes. Names carry meaning: Adam, human, and Eve, life, reflect humanity's role, while Israel, he strives with God, given to Jacob, Genesis 32 hours 28 minutes, signifies his transformation. Objects also hold symbolic weight. Noah's Ark, Genesis 6:14-16, represents divine protection. Jacob's ladder, Genesis 28 hours 12 minutes, symbolizes connection between heaven and earth, and Joseph's coat, Genesis 37:3, signifies favor and division. These symbols deepen the narrative and foreshadow Torah motifs, such as the tabernacle as a sign of God's presence, Exodus 25:40. Dialogue and characterization. Dialogue drives character development and themes. Abraham's negotiation with God over Sodom, Genesis 18:22-33, reveals his compassion and God's justice, while Jacob's wrestling with the angel, Genesis 32:24-32, showcases his perseverance and growth. The Joseph narrative, Genesis 37:50, excels in characterization. Joseph evolves from an arrogant dreamer, Genesis 37:5-11, to a wise leader, Genesis 41:40-46, and Judah transforms from a betrayer, Genesis 37:26-27, to a selfless advocate, Genesis 44:18-34. This depth prepares readers for the Torah's emphasis on leadership and communal ethics. Significance of literary style. Genesis narrative structure, poetic repetition, layered symbolism, and dynamic characters create a cohesive story of origins while setting the stage for the Torah's legal and communal focus. Its style resolves the patriarchal arcs, culminating in the establishment of Israel's tribes, Genesis 49, and bridges to the redemptive journey of Exodus through its emphasis on covenant and divine human relationships. 2 enduring lessons, timeless teachings from Genesis. Genesis imparts lessons that have shaped religious, ethical, and cultural values for millennia. These teachings, centered on faith, human nature, family, and divine promises, remain relevant, providing moral and spiritual guidance across time. Faith and obedience to God. Faith and trust in God's promises are central lessons. Abraham's departure from his homeland, Genesis 12:1-4, and his readiness to sacrifice Isaac, Genesis 22:1-18, exemplify radical obedience, teaching that faith often demands trust in the unknown. Noah's building of the ark, Genesis 6:14-22, amidst skepticism reinforces this, highlighting perseverance in adversity. These stories establish faith as a cornerstone, linking to the Torah's covenantal demands at Sinai, Exodus 19:5-6. Human nature, flaws and redemption. Genesis offers a complex view of humanity, balancing sin with the potential for redemption. Adam and Eve's disobedience, Genesis 3:1-19, introduces sin, yet God's provision of garments, Genesis 3:21, hints at grace. Cain's murder of Abel, Genesis 4:1-16, warns of envy's consequences, but his protective mark, Genesis 4:15, suggests mercy. Jacob's deceitful theft of Esau's blessing, Genesis 27:18-29, contrasts with his later transformation into Israel, Genesis 32 hours 28 minutes, illustrating repentance, Teshuvah. These narratives teach that human flaws are universal, but redemption is possible, a theme that anticipates the Torah's atonement laws, Leviticus 16. Family and lineage, the heart of the covenant. Family dynamics drive Genesis, reflecting the covenant's generational nature. Sibling rivalries, Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers, highlight conflict, while resolutions, like Jacob and Esau's embrace, Genesis 33:4, model forgiveness. The focus on descendants, Genesis 15:5, and tribal blessings, Genesis 49, underscores family as the vessel of God's promises, bridging to the Torah's vision of Israel as a covenantal community, Exodus 19:6. God's covenant and promises. The covenant, God's pledge of land, descendants, and blessing, unites Genesis stories. The rainbow after the flood, Genesis 9:12-17, assures divine mercy, while promises to Abraham, Genesis 12:1-3, 15:18-21, Isaac, Genesis 26:3-4, and Jacob, Genesis 28:13-15, trace its unfolding. The Joseph narrative, Genesis 37:50, resolves this by preserving the family in Egypt, with Joseph's burial request, Genesis 50:24-25, pointing to the future return to Canaan, fulfilled in Joshua 24:32. This covenantal thread connects Genesis to the Torah's liberation narrative. Significance of enduring lessons. Genesis lessons, faith, human complexity, family, and divine commitment, conclude its covenantal arc while laying a moral foundation for the Torah's laws and communal identity. The establishment of Israel's tribes, Genesis 49, and anticipation of redemption, Genesis 50:24-25, bridge to the ethical and ritual framework of Exodus through Deuteronomy. 3. Modern relevance, applying Genesis to contemporary challenges. Genesis themes and lessons remain vital in the 21st century, addressing spiritual, ethical, environmental, and social issues with timeless wisdom. Its stories offer practical guidance and inspiration for modern life. Faith in a secular age. In a world of secularism and scientific skepticism, Genesis' emphasis on faith provides meaning and resilience. Abraham's trust in God, Genesis 12:1-4, and Joseph's reliance on providence, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good," Genesis 50:20, speak to the need for purpose beyond materialism. These narratives encourage spiritual connection, influencing interfaith efforts like the Parliament of the World's Religions, which draw on Genesis' universal themes to foster dialogue. Ethical dilemmas, forgiveness, justice, and redemption. Genesis' portrayal of human nature informs modern ethics. Joseph's forgiveness of his brothers, Genesis 45:4-15, offers a model for reconciliation, applicable to personal disputes or global conflicts, such as post-apartheid South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Judah's growth, Genesis 44:18-34, supports restorative justice, emphasizing rehabilitation over punishment. Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, Genesis 22, raises questions about faith versus reason, resonating in debates about morality and obedience. Environmental stewardship, caring for creation. Genesis creation account, Genesis 1-2, positions humans as stewards of the earth, tasked with tending and keeping it, Genesis 2:15. This mandate inspires environmental movements, with religious groups, e.g. Pope Francis Laudato Si, 2015, and Jewish organizations like Hazan, citing Genesis to advocate sustainability. Noah's Ark, Genesis 6:9, preserving life amid destruction, serves as a metaphor for conservation, urging action against climate change and biodiversity loss. Family dynamics and cultural heritage. Genesis' focus on family speaks to modern issues of relationships and identity. Jacob and Esau's rivalry and reconciliation, Genesis 25:33, offer lessons for resolving sibling conflicts, while Joseph's reunion with his brothers, Genesis 45, highlights forgiveness in fractured families. The emphasis on lineage resonates in discussions about cultural preservation, inspiring communities, like Jewish federations or Islamic Relief, to strengthen heritage and solidarity in a globalized world. Significance of modern relevance. Genesis' relevance lies in its ability to address universal concerns, faith, ethics, environment, and family, while bridging ancient wisdom to contemporary ethics. Its narratives inspire positive action, ensuring its impact in both religious and secular contexts. Conclusion: Genesis as a unified narrative and bridge. Genesis' literary style, with its structured narrative, poetic repetition, and symbolism, unifies its stories of origins while preparing readers for the Torah's communal focus. Its enduring lessons, faith, human redemption, family, and covenant, resolve its patriarchal arcs and establish a moral foundation for the laws ahead. Its modern relevance connects these ancient truths to today's challenges, offering guidance for personal and societal growth. Together, these elements make Genesis a fitting conclusion to its own narrative and a vital bridge to the Torah's journey of liberation, law, and purpose, cementing its enduring significance across time and culture. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members, leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section. Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. Genesis Episode 34. Synthesis: The Joseph Narrative as Genesis Conclusion and Torah's Bridge. The Joseph Narrative, spanning Genesis chapters 37 to 50, stands as a pivotal segment within the book of Genesis, serving as both the culmination of the patriarchal stories and a critical transition to the broader narrative of the Torah, which encompasses the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This section shifts the focus from the episodic accounts of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to the cohesive, novella-like tale of Joseph, Jacob's favored son, whose journey from betrayal and enslavement to leadership in Egypt ensures the survival of his family and positions the Israelites for their eventual sojourn in Egypt. This narrative resolves the foundational covenantal promises made to the patriarchs: land, numerous descendants, and blessing to all nations, Genesis 12:1-3, while simultaneously laying the groundwork for the central events of the Torah, particularly the Exodus and the establishment of Israel as a covenantal nation under God's law. The Joseph narrative achieves this dual role through its rich theological themes, intricate literary structure, historical and cultural contexts, and enduring interpretive significance, weaving together the threads of Genesis origins with the redemptive arc of the Torah. This detailed exploration examines how the Joseph narrative functions as Genesis conclusion by tying up the patriarchal era's loose ends, familial conflicts, covenantal promises, and the establishment of Israel's tribal identity, while acting as a bridge to the Torah by setting the stage for the Israelites' enslavement, liberation, and nation-building. Key themes such as divine providence, forgiveness and reconciliation, leadership, and communal identity anchor this synthesis, supported by specific textual examples, historical insights, Jewish interpretive traditions, interfaith perspectives, and contemporary relevance. Through this multifaceted lens, the Joseph narrative emerges as a theological and narrative linchpin, unifying the Pentateuch and offering timeless insights into faith, resilience, and communal purpose. 1. Theological framework, resolving the covenant and preparing for redemption. The Joseph narrative serves as the theological capstone of Genesis by fulfilling the covenantal promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, while introducing themes that anticipate the Torah's focus on redemption, law, and nationhood. These promises, land, Canaan, descendants, a great nation, and blessing, for all nations, form the backbone of Genesis, and their resolution in chapters 37-50 marks the narrative's role as a conclusion. Simultaneously, the introduction of providence, forgiveness, leadership, and identity prepares the reader for the dramatic events of Exodus and beyond. Covenantal resolution in Genesis. The patriarchal covenant, first articulated in Genesis 12:1-3, promises Abraham a land, numerous descendants, and a blessing that extends universally. The Joseph narrative brings these promises to a point of fulfillment. Descendants. By the end of Genesis, Jacob's family has grown significantly in Egypt. Genesis 47 hours 27 minutes states, "Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful and multiplied exceedingly," echoing the earlier promise to Abraham, Genesis 15:5, and foreshadowing the exponential growth noted in Exodus 1:7. Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, are formally adopted into the tribal structure, Genesis 48:5-20, ensuring the covenant's continuity through the next generation. Land. Although the family resides in Egypt, the narrative reaffirms the promise of Canaan. Joseph's dying wish, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here," Genesis 50:24-25, points forward to the return fulfilled in Joshua 2400 hours 32. Jacob's burial in the cave of Machpelah in Canaan, Genesis 50:5-13, alongside Abraham and Isaac, physically ties the family to the promised land, even as they dwell abroad. Blessing. Joseph's rise to power in Egypt transforms him into a conduit of blessing for all nations. Genesis 41 hours 57 minutes records, "Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth," fulfilling the universal scope of Genesis 12:3. His administrative foresight during the famine, Genesis 41:33-36, saves not only Egypt but also his own family, extending the covenant's reach. Theological themes bridging to the Torah. Beyond resolving Genesis covenant, the Joseph narrative introduces key theological motifs that set the stage for the Torah's narrative. Divine providence. The story's theological heartbeat is God's sovereign guidance, most poignantly expressed in Joseph's words to his brothers, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today." Genesis 50 hours 20 minutes. This theme resolves Genesis' narrative of human frailty and divine promise, seen in earlier stories like the Flood, Genesis 6:9, or the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, by showing God's ability to weave human actions into his redemptive plan. It bridges to the Torah by preparing readers for the dramatic deliverance of the Exodus, where God again intervenes decisively, Exodus 3:7-10. Forgiveness and reconciliation. Joseph's forgiveness of his brothers, Genesis 45:4-15, after their betrayal, Genesis 37:18-28, heals the familial rifts that punctuate Genesis, Cain and Abel, Genesis 4, Isaac and Ishmael, Genesis 21, Jacob and Esau, Genesis 27:33. The emotional reunion, where Joseph declares, "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt, do not be distressed," Genesis 45:4-5, models reconciliation and foreshadows the Torah's ethical imperatives, such as loving one's neighbor, Leviticus 19:18, and the communal unity required at Sinai, Exodus 19:6. Leadership and responsibility. Joseph's transformation from a brash dreamer, Genesis 37:5-11, to a wise ruler, Genesis 41:40-46, and Judah's emergence as a sacrificial leader, Genesis 44:18-34, prefigure the leadership models of the Torah. Joseph's humility. It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer, Genesis 41 hours 16 minutes, and Judah's willingness to substitute himself for Benjamin echo Moses' intercession, Exodus 32 hours 32 minutes, and the kingly ideals of Deuteronomy 17:14-20. Communal identity. Jacob's blessings to his sons in Genesis 49 establish the 12 tribes of Israel, transitioning the covenant from a family to a nation. Phrases like Judah, "Your brothers shall praise you," Genesis 49:8, and "the scepter shall not depart from Judah," Genesis 49 hours 10 minutes, lay the groundwork for the tribal organization detailed in Numbers 1:4 and the covenant community at Sinai, Exodus 19:6. Theological significance. The Joseph narrative concludes Genesis by demonstrating the fulfillment of God's promises through providence and human agency, while its thematic richness, providence ensuring survival, forgiveness healing division, and leadership shaping identity, bridges to the Torah's focus on liberation and law. This theological synthesis unifies Genesis' arc from creation to covenant with the Torah's journey from slavery to nationhood, positioning Genesis 37:50 as a critical hinge in the Pentateuch. 2. Narrative structure. A cohesive conclusion and seamless transition. The literary artistry of the Joseph narrative, its novella-like unity, chiastic patterns, and deep characterization, distinguishes it from the fragmented patriarchal narratives, Genesis 12:36, providing closure to Genesis while paving the way for the Torah's nation-building story. Novella structure as conclusion. Unlike the earlier, episodic tales of Abraham's wanderings or Jacob's struggles, Genesis 37:50 unfolds as a continuous narrative with a clear arc, Joseph's dreams and betrayal, Genesis 37, his trials and rise in Egypt, Genesis 39:41, the reconciliation with his brothers, Genesis 45, and the establishment of Israel's tribal future, Genesis 49:50. This cohesiveness resolves Genesis' recurring themes. Sibling rivalry, the conflict between Joseph and his brothers, sparked by jealousy over his dreams, Genesis 37:5-11, reaches resolution in their tearful reunion, Genesis 45:14-15, tying up the motif of fraternal strife seen throughout Genesis. Divine favor, Joseph's journey mirrors the favor shown to Abraham and Jacob, but his story scales it to a national level, with his leadership saving all the earth, Genesis 41:57. Covenantal continuity, the Toledo framework, these are the generations of Jacob. Genesis 37:2, culminates in Genesis 49's blessings, solidifying the 12 tribes and concluding the patriarchal era. Chiastic structure as bridge. The narrative employs a chiastic structure, where events mirror one another to emphasize divine providence and continuity. Betrayal and reconciliation, the brothers' sale of Joseph into slavery, Genesis 37:18-28, finds its counterpart in their reconciliation, Genesis 45:4-15, with Joseph's assurance, God sent me before you to preserve life, Genesis 45:5, reframing their sin as part of a divine plan. Dreams and fulfillment, Joseph's youthful dreams of dominance, Genesis 37:5-11, are fulfilled when his brothers bow before him in Egypt, Genesis 42:6, underscoring God's faithfulness across decades. This chiastic pattern not only provides literary closure but also foreshadows the Torah's cyclical themes of exile and redemption, such as the Israelites' departure from Egypt, Exodus 14, and their eventual return to Canaan, Deuteronomy 30. Characterization as transition. The development of key figures bridges the personal focus of Genesis to the communal scope of the Torah. Joseph, his growth from an arrogant youth to a humble leader, God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do, Genesis 41:25, models the moral maturity needed for Israel's future leaders, like Moses, Exodus 18:13-26. Judah, his transformation from orchestrating Joseph's sale, Genesis 37:26-27, to offering himself for Benjamin, Genesis 44:33-34, marks him as a leader, prefiguring the Judahite monarchy, Genesis 49:10, and the Torah's emphasis on responsibility. Supporting figures, Tamar's resilience, Genesis 38, and Asenath's integration, Genesis 41:45, highlight inclusivity, anticipating the mixed multitude of Exodus 12:38 and the Torah's communal vision. Narrative significance. The novella structure unifies Genesis by resolving its conflicts and promises within a single, compelling tale, while the chiastic patterns and character arcs anticipate the Torah's redemptive and ethical framework. The narrative's conclusion, Jacob's death, Genesis 49:33, and Joseph's legacy, Genesis 50:22-26, seamlessly transitions to Exodus 1:8-14, where a new king arises who did not know Joseph, setting the stage for Israel's enslavement and liberation. 3 historical and cultural contexts, grounding the transition. The Joseph narrative's historical setting in the Late Bronze Age, circa 1500–1200 BCE, and its likely composition during the Babylonian exile, 587–539 BCE, anchor its role as both a conclusion to Genesis and a bridge to the Torah, addressing ancient realities and exilic hopes. Late Bronze Age setting. The narrative reflects a plausible historical backdrop. Egyptian context, Joseph's role as vizier, Genesis 41:40–46, aligns with Semitic figures in Egypt, such as the Hyksos rulers, circa 1650–1550 BCE, or viziers like Apel, 14th century BCE. Practices like dream interpretation, Genesis 40:41, and mummification, Genesis 50:2–3, mirror Egyptian customs, grounding the story in its setting. Tribal dynamics, Jacob's blessings, Genesis 49, reflect tribal identities consistent with ancient Near Eastern, patriarchal traditions, preparing for Israel's emergence as a confederation in the Torah. Babylonian exile composition. Finalized during the exile, the narrative resonates with Judah's displaced community. Exile and restoration, Joseph's journey from slavery to power parallels the exile's hope for return, Isaiah 41:11. His affirmation of providence, Genesis 50:20, counters Babylonian imperial narratives, reinforcing God's control. Communal unity, the reconciliation, Genesis 45, and tribal blessings, Genesis 49, offer a vision of restoration, bridging to the Torah's promise of redemption, Exodus 6:6–8. Engagement with Ain culture. The narrative adapts Ain literary motifs, wisdom tales, for example, Ludlul Bel Nemichi, dream reports, for example, Papyrus Chester BT3, and blessings, for example, Ugaritic texts, to assert Israel's monotheistic faith and covenantal ethics, preparing for the Torah's distinct identity, Exodus 19:5–6. Historical significance. The Late Bronze Age setting lends credibility to the covenant's fulfillment, while the exilic context infuses it with hope, making the narrative a bridge from Genesis' patriarchal past to the Torah's redemptive future. 4 Jewish interpretive traditions, enriching the bridge. Jewish exegesis, spanning Midrash, Talmud, Zohar, and medieval commentators like Rashi and Ramban, deepens the Joseph narrative's dual role, connecting Genesis' covenant to the Torah's spiritual and ethical vision. Midrash and Talmud. Bereshit Rabbah 89:2 interprets Joseph's dreams as divinely ordained, linking providence to the Exodus. Sota 36b praises his resistance to Potiphar's wife, Genesis 39:9, shaping Torah holiness, Leviticus 19:2. Yoma 86b connects the brothers' repentance, Genesis 42:21–22, to Yom Kippur, Leviticus 16. While Sanhedrin 92 views Genesis 49 as prophetic, unifying the tribes for Sinai. Zohar and Kabbalah. The Zohar casts Joseph as Yesod, foundation, channeling divine blessing, Zohar, Ve'ishev 182a, with his trials purifying the covenant for Sinai. Genesis 49 aligns the tribes with Sphirot, prefiguring Israel's mission. Rashi and Ramban. Rashi ties Genesis 50 hours 20 minutes to the Exodus, while Ramban sees Judah's blessing, Genesis 49:8-12, as Davidic, bridging Genesis to the Torah's messianic hope. Interpretive significance. These traditions enrich the narrative's theology, linking Genesis to Torah law and spirituality, ensuring its relevance across generations. 5. Interfaith significance, a shared Abrahamic narrative. The Joseph narrative resonates in Christianity and Islam, reinforcing its role as a bridge within the Abrahamic traditions. Christianity, Joseph prefigures Christ, Acts 7:9-16, with Genesis 49 hours 10 minutes linked to Jesus' kingship, Revelation 5:5. Islam, Surah Yusuf, Quran 12, mirrors Genesis, emphasizing providence and forgiveness, Quran 12 hours 92 minutes, unifying Abrahamic ethics. 6. Contemporary relevance, timeless lessons. The narrative's themes, providence, forgiveness, leadership, address modern challenges, from spiritual renewal to social justice, extending its bridge to today's world. 7. Conclusion, a theological and narrative cornerstone. The Joseph narrative unifies Genesis by resolving its promises and conflicts, while bridging to the Torah through its theological depth, narrative artistry, and cultural resonance. It invites readers across time to engage its vision of faith, reconciliation, and communal hope, cementing its place as a timeless cornerstone of the Pentateuch. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members, leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section.